Hydra Bob might be the least hyped card release we've ever had, but YoWoody has managed to take it into the top three. So let's talk about what Hydra Bob does well before talking a little bit about the deck that he used and what the future for this underrated question mark card may be. Woody, first of all, welcome back to the show. You have retaken the crown from Big Baby. You are the most guest on this channel now. Welcome, of course, back. However, Hydra Bob, can you sell me on this card? I think it's pretty obvious why people were not very interested in it. This is a card that was coming in the immediate wake of Arishem and didn't have an immediate home. However, you just sort of looked at the numbers and you were like, "Oh, that's a 1/4. I'm gonna do something with this."
Yeah, I mean that's pretty much like the main draw of the card, whether or not it's, underpowered, is that it's, it has an efficient stat line. 1 energy for 4 power is really good. And even though it's smaller than like an Ant-Man or a Martyr or something like that, it's definitely liable to lose you way less games because than Martyr or Titania or something like that. Because one, uh you know when the bad thing is going to happen. Like with Martyr, you could be like, oh, they're gonna come over the top of me over here. That could be scary because if it's close, then Martyr moves and you lose the game. But Bob, it's like they snapped. If he moves, am I staying? If he moves, can he lose me the game? If yes, then you leave. Sometimes you want to snap with him. So I do understand that he's got a little bit of a lower stat line than those 1/5s because, like I said, like the blowout, like, oh shit, Martyr just lost me 8 cubes scenarios are like way fewer and farther between with this card if you just see it coming.
So let's talk about the deck. This is a fairly classic Dracula dump deck, and it relies on a lot of the things that normal Dracula dump decks do, except it also has, contra to many Dracula dump decks, it has good cards in it in the form of Sasquatch and Mockingbird, which is very rare in the context of Dracula dump decks, which are sort of typically regarded as like this sort of, I don't know, they're very much usually a budget deck. They're an archetype that is played with a bunch of cards that you get in Series 3. And I don't know if I've ever actually seen anyone do Drac Dump with Mysterio, Sasquatch, Mockingbird, but it does make a lot of sense to me because it's like, oh, suddenly you've taken this deck that is mostly a budget deck and you've upgraded it with real power in it. Can you talk to me about the work that these changes do?
Yeah, so there's like a lot of really nice parts about having the Mysterio, Mockingbird, Sasquatch kind of token package in here. One, Mysterio and Squirrel Girl are very nice for quickly filling your board and helping you be able to mitigate the downsides of both Bob and Martyr by the end of the game. Two, Sasquatch, a lot of the time, if you can't find a place to play him in the early game, he just sits in your hand and is kind of like not a thing that you're able to do. So he has some nice like synergy with your game plan of like dumping and having Dracula eat a big guy. Because a lot of time, like if you draw him late in another deck, he's just sitting in your hand, and then this deck, it's perfectly fine if he's sitting in your hand. And your Dracula becomes a 4/11 and eats him. Uh, and then Mockingbird actually, like, surprise, surprise, probably the strongest part of this deck.
Yeah.
The token package here is actually really cool because you can do this thing where you like buff your payoff cards like Infinite and Mockingbird with Gwenpool, and then you can get to a point where you have like a 0/3 Wasp and like a 0/11 Mockingbird and a 6/22 Infinite, and then you play all your token cards out. And you could literally, I have done it many times with this deck, many more times than I was expecting, just raw pass into, 0/3 Wasp, Mockingbird, Infinite final turn. And it is actually quite strong. And it's like a very viable backup plan if you're not doing like the dump stuff. So it all just comes together and kind of like supports like the weaknesses of these other packages in like a really nice, cohesive way.
Yeah, one of the things that really stuck out to me was running Squirrel Girl and Mysterio at the same time. Talk to me a little bit about managing your board space with a deck like this, and like what your incentives are. Are you just running that stuff out there? You're just like, it's gonna be fine, and my opponent never plays Clog. Is that your general way to approach it?
Well, my general philosophy is if I have alternative plays, like if I have Squirrel Girl turn one, Bob turn one, I'm playing Bob. If I have Jeff turn one, Mysterio turn one, I'm playing Jeff because the best, yeah, sorry. Yeah, turn two.
Yeah.
I'm playing Jeff. So Jeff turn two, Mysterio turn two. I would favor Jeff because I want to, first of all, see what my opponent's doing if they're going to try to clog me or whatever. Like, I don't want to just run the Mysterio out and then I'm just crippled in terms of, because, like, board space, cards that take up multiple board slots per, like, card oftentimes becomes the trickier part of managing your dump stuff correctly than managing your hand size because like if you can't get your cards to the board they're just going to sit in your hand, then your deck is less consistent, so you kind of have to be wary about that kind of stuff, and sometimes it's worth like running out only two Mysterios or whatever late game when you can to avoid creating a backup of cards in your hand because of a lack of board space. So I generally prefer holding like the Squirrel Girl and Mysterio until around turn 4 or 5 ish. So it's like I would do, Squirrel Girl into a Jeff into like whatever, like a Martyr and hold or a Cosmo or something. And then after that, if Gwenpool's in my hand, you take the Gwenpool to hit like the Mysterio and whatever, and then run all your stuff out. Last turn, you can play your Bird, your Sasquatch, whatever else is left, and then your Dracula hits the Infinite, and you're good.
Yeah, so I guess getting into like a bit more of a metagame consideration. When you think about matchups here, I'm going to ask about one matchup in specific, and I think we all know
Yep.
what it's going to be. The plan into Arishem appears to just be match power with power. Say, like, look, you don't really have the ability to contest all three lanes the way I do, and I can go bigger than a blob in at least one of those lanes. And if I can go bigger than a blob in at least one of those lanes, you are probably not going to be able to go bigger than a blob in more than two of the other ones, right? Like you in two of the other ones, you're not going to be able to do that. Is that about right in terms of how this plays out?
Yeah, that is pretty much right. And with a deck with like these efficiently statted and like granularly placeable cheap units, like the way you can like decide where your power is going so efficiently and specifically, it is very easy to get priority in it. And if you top deck a Cosmo, you need to just dump your Cosmo on whatever turn, or the Cosmo is just sitting in your hand and you find an opportunity to use it, you almost always have priority against a deck like Arishem or a deck like the Wong Namora decks that are putting out like all this small ball setup stuff early game. And Cosmo also can act like if you just want to play him on 3, he's another good win condition against Arishem because, like you said, you beat a blob in one lane. If you have a Cosmo in the other lane, you don't even have to worry about a blob. So
Right.
it just ends up being like you're kind of pigeonholing them into like fighting for this lane where you're stacking like big guy after big guy, and it just becomes very hard for Arishem in particular to keep up.
Right. The Arishem matchup is something that this deck looks sort of built for in a sense because like when you look at it, what's happening is they are playing, stuff ahead of curve, and you are playing cards that have more points than they should. Right? Like it's a
Yes.
different approach to the same end result, except yours are the 12 cards in their deck and theirs are sometimes randomly generated, right? Like the smallest card in here is a Wasp, which is free, technically infinite value, right? A Squirrel Girl is a 1/4. A Hydra Bob is a 1/4. A Martyr is a 1/5. Jeff is Jeff, but whatever. Mysterio is a 2/3, a 2/4. Cosmo is tech. Dracula is like a 4/12 or something. Gwenpool's like a 4/12. Mockingbird is free. Sasquatch is free, right? Like that is none of this is stuff you're paying anything on rate for, except Jeff
Mhm.
is Jeff, right? And so you end up in this situation where you're attempting the same goal, but what you're trying to do is do it on a wider scale. Where like they're doing turn 5 with their blob. You're like, okay, that's cool. You have a turn 5 blob. I have a Dracula and mine's probably bigger. And that is a thing that not a lot of other decks are able to leverage right now. Do you think there's any fragility in it, being a deck built for an Arishem matchup and being like, well, I really hope I don't run into a deck playing Killmonger or anything like that?
Well, I think Killmonger is not as big of a deal against this deck as like Clog magic stuff is,
Yeah.
because a lot of the times like the magic stuff can just force you to have like all this shit in your hand that you don't want, and then your Dracula becomes like very inconsistent. So like the Magic games are definitely winnable, but like you're always going to be like at most 50% to win just because of the nature of the deck. Like if you need your Dracula to hit a big guy to be like their Red Hulk or whatever, like they're going to keep cards in your hand because you're not going to be able to play everything out. So you're just like inherently at least 50% or at most like 50% to win most games, I would say. So you really have to snap and retreat carefully versus clog and have some good foresight and like what is going to be an issue in terms of hand space and stuff. But outside of that, I think that this deck has pretty great matchups into a lot of stuff right now. Like you said, like going as big as Arishem can go is no like it's nothing to sneeze at. And the fact that you have like harder to tech game plan because like your Dracula is classic Dracula. You know, he's almost impossible to tech with like if you're playing Mysterio Dracula, the Red Guardian's never gonna hit him, and you're chilling. You have like the unshangable birds or the Cosmo to protect whatever is shangable, and you have all these one drops that are good, but I have won many games where people just killmonger my squirrels, my Bob, and my martyr, and I'm like, okay, that's cool, but I still have 2/6 Mysterio with Mockingbird and Sasquatch Infinite. Like you have to catch up to that now. So I think it does have a really good matchup spread, even um outside of Arishem, and it also does pretty well into like all of the smaller ball talk stuff, just trying to exploit Arishem specifically. It's nice to be able
Yeah.
to go so big and not have that weakness.
Yeah, when I look at this, I look at a deck that like this sheet seems like it would be good at Athena stuff, like just Athena and
Yeah,
like
yeah,
raw dogging a hawk, or Athena and even not raw dogging a hawk. Like it does seem like it'd be able to compete with that. I do wonder about like the ability for a deck like that to contest your Dracula lane with Iron Man. Is seems like it could be a thing that could be a little bit problematic, but those decks are a little less consistent now because they're running that hawk stuff. They're not as good at doing the thing that they do at that as they were when they were a Iron Man, Sasquatch, Mockingbird, Mysterio deck. And I
yeah,
think
exactly.
this speaks to like what that deck wants to be doing now. Instead of being like just a Darkhawk tech deck, just like play as much power as you can. But the real question I'm
Yeah,
getting at is how metagamey is this? How much is Arishem existing with the target on its back that it has protecting this deck from like in a world where people watch this video and they're like, "Oh my god, this is amazing and this does really really well." What is it that you're afraid to see? I assume the answer is going to be Doc Ock, but anything else?
well, it is pretty like the fact that I've been doing so well with this deck is definitely in no small part thanks to the prevalence of Arshim and how good that matchup is for you because of your consistent ability to put out as much power as they are. But it's good against Leech, which Arshim is running, and Doc Ock is why uh like Bob and Jeff specifically are actually pretty good against Doc Ock because like if they pull some big
Mm,
shit from your hand, you snap and then the Bob moves and you can like Cosmo or you can reinforce that lane with like an unshangable Mockingbird and make it so they have to devote like a bunch of resources to that lane. Same thing with Jeff. That's like the main reason why he's in here is in case like you Doc Ock and you want to like shift something out and protect something with a Cosmo or put a Dracula in that lane where they pulled your small stuff so you just have a bunch of untechable power. I think it's actually pretty good against that kind of stuff as long as it's not like the main clog that you're worried about is like magic debris, White Widow, Titania shit, where it's just like
yeah.
filling your board with bad cards and not good cards from your own deck. And then outside of that, I would say the main like struggles that this deck has is dealing with Phoenix Force can be iffy if you don't draw your Cosmo on 3. Like if you have to guess the Phoenix Force, you pretty much only have Cosmo on 3 into their Boom Boom. And you can beat like Shuri Nimrod stuff with your power. So if you do get the Cosmo down on time and you have priority, then Phoenix Force is decent. But if you miss the Cosmo by 1 turn, which you have to get him on turn 3, then you're kind of just dead to Phoenix Force. You're also just dead to like Tribunal, and negative can be an issue. You're not running any Mobius or
Yeah.
any Eliath or anything like that. So once again, Cosmo is kind of like your only saving grace there. You're gonna have to predict where the negative goes, and that can be kind of a shit show. So I find myself just retreating against negative snaps most of the time. Like it's not worth predicting with the Cosmo, especially because I suck at it. But you're not like you have Hail Marys in these matchups, and by Hail Marys I mean Cosmo. But those are the ones that I'd be like everything going like combo big, like even Hella, honestly, like Hella
Yeah.
and uh Phoenix Force and Mr. Negative and Tribunal and stuff like that is also Mobius is he
A
kind of hurts a
problem.
little bit in this deck because you want to be able to get the cards out of your hand, and they need to be cheap to do that. So he can definitely mess you up, but honestly, Gwenpool makes the Mobius matchup feel a little bit better because like if you have to play a bird from your hand, sometimes the bird is a 5/13. It's just a legitimately good play. So
Yeah.
you can beat Mobius. You can beat a lot of stuff, but combo big is what I would be scared of.
Yeah, this is a deck that's effectively in what I like to call the bounce zone, where the numbers it
Yeah,
puts out are like very close to a combo deck, but they're not actually there. Like it's like
yeah,
when they
exactly.
do their stuff, you're still just like, I'm probably like 40-30% here.
Yeah.
Like I don't really feel good about this. I might cope stay it though, and like that's a dangerous
Yeah.
mindset to have against a deck
Yes,
like that.
exactly.
Wasp's secret power is that she gets things done. In this deck, I think a lot of those things are filling up the board, getting out of your hand, and having 3 power. Is that pretty much the vibe here? I know when I see Wasp in a deck a lot of the time, I'm like, man, I really don't want to have this card that doesn't really do anything. But in this deck, it's discounting Sasquatch, it's carrying Gwenpool buffs, it's making sure your Martyr and Hydra Bob don't move to bad spots. Is that worthwhile here, or is there a part of you that's like, I kind of want that to be like Ant-Man and get more power in here?
I don't know. I mean, honestly, I think you need one card in a dump deck where it's just like free get something out of my hand card. And Wasp in this deck, you could choose like Makari or Wasp or Blade for that slot. But I don't really like Blade because like a lot of times you're like praying on a top deck Infinite and then you top deck the Infinite and you're like, well, great, I have this Blade in my hand, so it's either a 50-50 or I play the Blade and it's another, I don't like Blade in these types of decks.
Yeah.
But with Wasp, she's good for carrying Gwenpool buffs. She's good for filling the board, like you said, and she is also good for like the opposite of carrying Gwenpool buffs, which is like if you have other cards that you want to
Mm.
get hit by Gwenpool in your hand, uh, late game, like you want your Dracula to eat like a bigger Sasquatch because you don't have Infinite or whatever, you can just play her out and focus the Gwenpool buffs onto your other cards, which is something that I found myself doing a lot. Like if you just hold Wasp, you can decide do I want the buffs on the Wasp, or would I rather, have a higher chance to get all these buffs on my Mysterio or my Jeff or whatever if you need like a big Jeff to win a hard to reach lane or something. So she's nice for that. And outside of that, it's mainly just like she she does win games in this deck a lot. Like the fact that you're playing this unseen like it could be a 0-5 sometimes 0-3 is just good. And I have won a lot of games with specifically Wasp in this list where she kind of feels like that that almost Captain Marvel lead type card where it's like you, when you put it in your deck, you're like, I'm not sure I want this in my deck, and then like you just remember that specific card like winning you games a lot of the time, and it just felt way nicer than I expected, honestly.
She gets things done.
Absolutely.
Squirrel Girl is doing double duty here as both a card that is a 1/4, which you are interested in, and a card that is discounting your Mockingbird. Was there any consideration when you looked at a deck like this to ask yourself, what is it that makes this a better Squirrel Girl deck than, say, the Blue Marvel Zoo stuff? Because I asked myself that question, and what I arrived at was it doesn't really matter how wide we go or how tall we go on those wide locations if those locations aren't beating a blob. So what matters is making sure that instead of being a Blue Marvel Gilgamesh deck, we have multiple lanes that are bigger than a blob. Is that roughly what she's trying to enable here in terms of like why we're this kind of deck instead of a Blue Marvel deck?
Yeah, I mean the nice thing about Squirrel Girl is just that like a lot of the times, you lose a game and you think like, oh, if I played my 1-drop mid on turn 1 or my 2-drop right on turn 2, I would have had enough to win that lane. The Real Mysterio here or there. And Squirrel Girl kind of just gives you time to like see what your opponent is doing and set up in the lanes you want to set up in, because it's only a difference of 1 power from the squirrels to the Squirrel Girl's body. So you're not hard committing to any one thing with like your Nebula or your Martyr or whatever, a lane that you're just going to have to reinforce, or Martyr is going to lose you that lane or game. And then it's also just nice because you're running Cosmo, so Squirrel Girl Cosmo is like really, really nice in a lot of these combo heavy matchups where you want priority. It's pretty much impossible for like a Phoenix Force deck or a Wong deck to like out priority you if you're playing like your stuff on curve and you have the Squirrel Girl. She's super nice for that. And then also, like I said, like the plan B of this deck is just playing good cards in Mockingbird, and then the plan C is literally Raw Infinite. And Raw Infinite, you need a free Mockingbird for that to like ever be doable in the current meta, and Squirrel Girl lets you do that. So
Hydration Robert, as a 1/4, how often have you felt like when you're playing this card where you're just like, this card just straight up better than Ant-Man here? Like, yes, I may be filling up my board a lot. I get it. But also, this card is better than Ant-Man. It has this ability to move around to where I need it to go. It has this ability to unclog a clogged lane after a Doc Ock. It has this ability to just be a 1/4 without any effort in those games where I'm not filling everything up. And I know where it's going to be because of the snap. How much thought goes into like Bob versus Ant-Man here?
actually, a lot. I have been very critical of this card's performance, and I was using Ant-Man as like a 1-to-1 comparative.
Yeah.
And like a lot of games, surprisingly, I'm like, Bob is just straight up better than Ant-Man here. Like, I need to contest this off lane. I got my big stuff over here to beat their blob. I need some power to come over the top of their Mockingbird or whatever they have over here. And I just don't have, I don't have space to fill. I don't have the resources to like pad this lane out entirely. And Bob is just straight up better than Ant-Man there. He's also really good for locations where since you have such like a low early game curve in this deck, he's really good for locations where you have to fill, like White Hot Room or the Raft, where you want to be snapping those when you're filling, and then you play Bob, you snap and fill, and then he just moves out instantly and gives you that space back. And then it's also nice because the deck can fill really fast if it needs to, like a Dracula. So if there is like a Sanctum Sanctorum or something, and you snap your Bob into that location, first of all, Dracula dump decks don't often have ways of reaching into hard to reach locations like that, and then it's nice to have with Bob. And second of all, like 4 power is really good to put in a location like that because it beats Jeff. So they have to do something bigger than Jeff to win that location. And Ant-Man just doesn't give you that type of like reach utility that I think is actually really important for a deck like this that goes tall in a lot of lanes, to just be able to like sneaky reach small stuff into the harder to reach lanes.
Between Bob and Martyr, which one is a better card? I think I know the answer, but I just want to make sure.
I believe Bob is better than Martyr.
That's what I was thinking, right? I was like, man, like, I do think it's better than Martyr, and this sort of like brings me to the second question, which is, a lot of people would talk about buffing Hydra Bob, and it's like, I don't know what they can do that won't make him like really, really good, right? Like, what are they supposed to do? Like, people have been saying like, oh, they should make him gain power whenever he moves. That's like a 1/8 or a 1/6. Even if they
Yeah.
just add the Martyr stat line onto him, he's better than every other card with that stat line. And so it's like a
Yeah.
very interesting like dynamic that these cards have, because like it's like, ugh, I don't know what they're exactly supposed to do with this guy. So if Bob was Martyr, what would that do to this deck specifically? Because I think, like we talked about the breakpoints that would hit, that would now tie a Nocturne on an off lane. That's kind of a big
Hmm.
deal. And now your Jeff and a Nocturne would tie a Vision. Like, again, a big deal. That is actually a breakpoint. With Martyr in the deck, managing these multiple potential lose conditions, how do you go about doing
I mean, one of the tricks with Martyr in this deck to make her a little bit less liable to fuck you over is just playing her after you play Mysterio. If I have Bob and Martyr in my hand on turn 1, I'm always going to play Bob, because ideally you're playing Martyr after Mysterio. That way the Mysterio clones, or sorry, you're playing her before Mysterio. Sorry.
Okay.
So you want to play Bob on turn 1 if you don't know when you're going to play your Mysterio. And then ideally, whenever you're sequencing your cards, you want to play Martyr before Mysterio. Let's clarify. So that when the Mysterio clones reveal, they will reveal after Martyr checks if she can lose you the game. So she checks every lane. She's like, okay, I can't lose you the lane. And then the Mysterio clones will reveal and then, solidify your power. And if you do it the other way, they'll reveal and then she'll be like, okay, we're winning this lane by enough where I can move over here and lose you the lane. But a lot of the time she'll think that you already lost that lane and just won't move there because the Mysterio clone's making the difference. So that is important to negating her downside. And then also playing her later is just nice because you want to know the lanes that you're likely to fill and put her in a lane that is probably not one of those, because filling a Martyr lane is like the easiest way to let her fuck you over is if you have like one lane that has nothing in it and then you're filling these other two. She's just always going to move to the off lane if she can. So you kind of want her to contest like your like small ball kind of like lane where you're just putting stuff to be a threat there to be answered. And then also you really want to get Martyr out of your hand before you play Gwenpool. You do not want to buff Martyr with Gwenpool. That's a terrible idea. That's a terrible investment to make. So
Yeah. But on the other hand, what if you had like a 1/9? That seems pretty cool to me.
yeah, true.
Yeah. Just realized I had Dan hit Martyr, and I made the audience look at the normal base Martyr the entire time. My bad, audience. I apologize. Is there anything about Jeff in this deck that is unique from Jeff in every other deck that Jeff goes in, which is basically just like, we all kind of know at this point that Jeff is the card that you put in your deck when you're just like, well, my deck isn't very good at getting into other locations. So now between Jeff and Squirrel Girl and Hydra Bob, I can get into these other locations. I can unclog myself from the Doc Ock matchup, which is very unpleasant. Is Jeff doing anything beyond that, or is he just here being good at what he does?
I'd say the only thing he does beyond that is like allow you to fill better. Like if you're holding your Mysterio for late game and you have like 3 cards in a lane, you can move the Jeff out and fill so that your Martyr like straight up can't move and your Bob doesn't move on a snap if you don't want him to and stuff. That's like his only other like nuanced purpose.
Yeah, because Jeff in a deck like this is very good because it's power that you can commit to the board without deciding where it is. And deciding where your power goes is kind of the whole point of this deck. So the more options you have, the better that is. He's obviously very good there. But that's true for like a lot of decks that Jeff plays in. So it's not like specifically unique to this.
Yeah.
Is Mysterio the best card in this deck? Like, be honest with me. It feels like it's got to be like top 1, 2, or 3.
I mean, Mysterio is definitely like a linchpin card in this deck. He's like your ideal Gwenpool target. He kind of like falls into the same theme of this deck, which is like it's really hard to predict output ranges. And like Mysterio just puts like even more, variability in where your power actually is. Like you don't know the big guy that Dracula is going to eat. I've had a lot of games where I literally just completely abandoned my Dracula lane because I didn't draw an Infinite. I just Sasquatch and Mockingbird the other lanes. And they like you can win a Dracula lane like that because they just are scared to commit to it. And Mysterio kind of fits into that theme of like just they don't know exactly how much they need to contest in each lane. And obviously, like Mysterio being the guy that makes your bird a 2-cost is insane. And, he's an important part of making your bird free when you need her to be. And he does have a little bit, I would say, higher risk in this deck compared to the normal deck. The norm that you would run him in, just because your hand size management is so important. And like I said, board space and hand size management a lot of the time are like one and the same. So he is a little bit riskier, and you really, really have to think about when and where you're playing him so that you're able to get all the cards out of your hand. But he definitely is probably he is the best card in the deck. Yeah, I mean he brings your Mysterio game plan. He's your Gwenpool target. He's how you play Sasquatch early. Like he definitely is. I would
Does it
say.
all. Like, this
Yeah,
is, like, Mysterio is a card that we have used every single piece of his the weirdness
yeah.
that is this card.
The martyr downside mitigation.
Yeah. Like, okay, you want to fill up the board, he's got you. You want to carry a Gwenpool buff, he's got you. You want to discount a Sasquatch and Mockingbird, he's got you. Like, there's just so much going on with this card, and every deck he's in now, it feels like, is using every part of the weirdness of this card that makes it different from every other card in order to do something mildly unfair. Let's talk about the best boy, or more specifically, let's talk about other options for this tech slot, because I do think that a lot of people are going to look at this and be like, I don't like running Cosmo in here. What are my other options? I think, like, Juggernaut came to mind as, like, a fairly reasonable disruptive piece. But what is it that you see out of Cosmo that you think makes it just dramatically better than other options in this spot?
Well, there's a lot of on reveal bodies going
Okay.
on right now. Not just on reveal cards, but like literally bodies that are nothing if they do not do the on reveal.
Talking about
Like
Mystique.
Mystique
Yeah.
and like absorbing manning a blob
Right.
and blob himself. Like those cards just don't work in a lane. Like there's just so many of those in the meta right now that Cosmo is essentially like a Jean Grey goose, where just like against certain decks that they just cannot get a big enough body into that lane for you to win. And that's just super valuable in any meta when a tech card is so like deterministically powerful, even when you're playing it like proactively. And that's what Cosmo is in the current meta. But if things were to change and that kind of stuff would be less popular, absolutely, Juggernaut would be a very good consideration. I mean, it's like kind of the same thing as Cosmo right now, but I want Cosmo over Juggernaut because, uh, like Juggernaut's kind of like the opposite right now, where it's like if if they're playing this really big body and they have like another one in this lane and you Juggernaut them away, sometimes you're like, I really needed to go into the lane they already played, or I'm going to lose the other lane. And if they have priority and they're mistaking a blob or absorbing a blob or playing a blob, your Juggernaut does nothing. So that's why I prefer Cosmo right now. Also because he is able to be played to such effectiveness proactively. It's nice in a dump list where you can just curve him out. And besides Juggernaut, I would say like other 3-cost tech slots. It's just like your usual suspects. You got Juggernaut, Mobius is a good one, and Red Guardian. Those are the three that I would recommend.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. The big man himself, Dracula. Talk to me a little bit about leveraging the threat of this card versus leveraging the actual power that it wields.
Yeah, I mean, there have been games where I kind of combine the dump and like raw infinite game plans to like just entirely juke my opponent. Like if you can see like your Dracula lane, you've got like a Bob and a Dracula and a Mysterio where they don't know where the real one is, and you have the resources to pass on 5, you can straight up juke people with like a raw infinite, or you can just not draw the infinite and be like, okay, well, my Dracula's not going to be that big. He's going to hit like a martyr or something that you can leave in hand for him so she doesn't lose the game. And then uh, you just juke your big stuff out of the Dracula lane. You play like your Squatch and your Bird all to the same lane. They're too scared to contest the Dracula lane, and then you win that one, just because they don't contest it, and you win the other one because you're dumping all this like these, Gwenpool buffed big stat sticks into one lane, and they're just not expecting it. So you don't always have to commit to the Dracula, which is like honestly super nice because a lot of 4-drops like the lane they play their 4-drop in, most of the time you're like, okay, I know what's going on there. I know how to play around that, and I know whether or not I can contest it. Like if somebody plays like a Sentry, and you're okay, well they have the 8 power there, and then they're either gonna Annihilus or Cersei. It's like kind of obvious what they're gonna do. But with Dracula, it's so low committal, and you're just like he can either be the biggest 4-drop in the game, or you can just be like, I need him to be flexible this game, so I'm just gonna like, play my stuff to another lane. It's honestly super nice.
Yeah, and I think one thing that this card and this deck is benefiting from a lot right now is there's just not nearly as many people playing Red Guardian as there were even 2 weeks ago, and a
Yeah,
lot of that is
yeah.
Arishem, right? And I
Mhm.
think that like that's my biggest worry if this deck like starts moving into the future is like suddenly people are playing Red Guardian, and I realize you can play around it with Mysterio, but that is a little bit iffy and a little bit specific, and yeah,
You have Cosmo too. I
yeah,
mean,
it's just like that is something that really does occur to me is like Dracula's kind of back on the menu, boys.
yeah,
Gwenpool, Marvel Snap's newest season pass card, seems to be here just because it's like card good and we run Mysterio and we are interested in turn 5 Mysterioing in a lot of games. Where it's like, okay, we go Gwenpool into Mysterio into Sasquatch Mockingbird type
yeah.
endgame things. Is that basically what she's doing here? Where it's just like our job with Gwenpool is like player on turn 4, hand dump turn 5, Sasquatch Mockingbird turn 6, maybe alongside a Dracula Infinite is our dream, right? Like we have like a 1-cost Sasquatch, a 1-cost Mockingbird, a Dracula that discards Infinite. That's our final turn. That's our dream, right?
Yeah, that is like what you really want her to be doing in this deck is buffing your Mysterio and facilitating like this big, turn 5 setup into a turn 6 dump all your big cards. But she also has like a unique aspect of her in this deck where she is actually a decent turn 6 draw if you're able to buff a card in your hand that your Dracula eats. Like if you have like 2 1-drops and Gwenpool in your hand on turn 6, or like a Mysterio and a Gwenpool and like 2 decently sized cards, or a Mockingbird that you're gonna play or something, you can play out the Gwenpool and then she'll buff the card in your hand before your Dracula eats it, which is pretty nice for it to be like a viable, power generating card on the final turn of the game.
So do you think they need to nerf this card? Because she's kind of just
Yeah.
like been a thing the whole time.
Yeah. I
What
mean,
would your proposed nerf be?
I don't know. I think maybe like just make her cost more.
Hmm.
That's where I would start. I don't know about lowering her power, because if they lowered her power, it would probably have to be like to 6 or 7 for it to feel like actually fair compared to like stature and miles. But I do like the ability, like this high roll ability to be able to reduce it to like this free thing. I just think it should cost more, maybe cost 6 or 7. Maybe 6 is a good spot where it's like, it's more cumbersome to have in your hand than a miles and less flexible inherently if you're not getting it to be free or really cheap. And it's like if I'm playing Mysterio Squirrel Girl, that is a lot of effort that I'm putting into discounting this card, and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
risk in like the current state of Marvel Snap and all the clog and everything. So I do think that it should be a worthwhile payoff. I just think that like it just is such a free roll way too easily with so many locations and stuff like that, that I think I would start with increasing the energy and not the power.
That makes sense. A lot of people said this card wasn't very good when it first came out, and I was not one of those people. Where do you think on the continuum of like if you just had to rate this card against all the other stuff that you can discount, right? Miles and Stature and Mockingbird, the cards in that vein, what number do you think Sasquatch ranks? Is it like the second, the third? What are we talking about here?
Um It's probably like the 3rd, I would say, behind like Death. I think Death is probably better in the decks that she's played
Sure.
in than Sasquatch. But the nice thing about Sasquatch is that you can kind of just like find yourself able to play this card more than other decks. Like you're like, okay, well, I played Jeff and Bob on turn 3. Now I can play a 4/10. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't always have to be like this insane high roll thing. And then when it is, it's just nutty. Like you're playing Mysterio plus 1-drop Wasp, 1-drop on 5, and your Sasquatch is just a 0/10. It's pretty insane, and it has like these insane high roll moments where it is pretty much uh it's like better than death in those moments because of, you know, death requires like all this archetype specific setup, and then Sasquatch is just like you play the cards, you discount Sasquatch, and any deck can do that really as long as you have like Mysterio, pretty much, of course. So Sasquatch is probably, I would say it's like Mockingbird, Death, Sasquatch in terms of like individual cost reductiveness, like being really good. But Sasquatch is also nice because, like I said, like you can play a 4/10, but you can also just play like a 5/10, or it doesn't always have to be like this insane thing. Whereas like when you're not playing Death, she's kind of just bricking in your hand. So
This guy's here, mostly as a Dracula target. Give me a ballpark for how many games you actually play your Plan C of like, I'm gonna play the Infinite and Mockingbird, I guess.
I think I did it like 4 or 5 times yesterday while I was playing this deck throughout the day, and I literally won every single one of those games. I feel like people, when you pass in the current meta, everyone's like, why did he pass? Why did he pass? And then you just play Infinite. And they're like, oh, right, right, Infinite,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yep.
So it can actually catch people by surprise, especially because a lot of people will just assume that like you're trying to set up for something, and being able to, so it's pretty much like paying a price, like detaching your game plan from your Dracula is something that you are able to do if you pay the price of passing on turn 5, and the real enablers for you to be able to do that are like Gwenpool Wasp and Free Mockingbird, because if you're able to play all that stuff on turn 6, it's actually very much worth passing turn 5 a lot of the time, especially if you just do not have Dracula. And I really wasn't expecting that when building the deck, but I love passing turn 5 into the Infinite. It's just like kind of like a nostalgic play for me. So it was nice to be able to do it with some actual genuine effectiveness.
All right. Thank you so much for joining me, YoWoody. And if there's anything you want to promote, now is the time to do it. Obviously, make sure you check him out on Twitch, twitch.tv/YoWoodyMJ. And on Twitter at twitter.com or x.com. Jesus, I'm not going to say that. It'll redirect you. Twitter.com/YoWoody2. Is there anything you want to promote specifically? Remember, this video will go up today. So if you want to talk about Gamora, now would be the time.
Yes, okay. Well, I'm going to be streaming all day on twitch.tv/YoWoodyMJ, and I'm going to be doing a cosplay dressed as Gamora, green face
Green.
paint and all,
Yep.
wig and all, so you guys can come over and check that out if you want. A couple more things I just wanted to say. Thank you to Butt Squad for kind of, he's like the inspiration for this deck. He's a Dracula dump enjoyer, and he's the reason that I have Hydra Bob.
Hold on. You're telling me that Butt enjoys dumping?
Yeah, Butt
Okay.
does enjoy dumping. I know it might be
Interesting.
it might be a surprise to everyone.
Please continue.
And then also, as part of the Butt shout out, I just had to say, fuck you, Jimmy Dickens. Classic. Just the
We're
Butt
litigating. I
battle
want everyone who
cry.
doesn't understand what's happening right now to understand. We're litigating like joke Discord beefs. Like that's what's happening at the end of this video. You can click off. It's fine. We're gonna keep litigating joke Discord beefs.
And that's pretty much all for me.
Okay.
My sign off. Thank you for having me. It's always super fun to do these.
It's very enjoyable for me too, because I am so rarely able to keep up with and play something like this, because it's like if I take one day off and then it's like, oh my god, I have to now I have to catch back up, and this is what this is doing for me, and I hope that's doing it for my audience as well, because I know a lot of people have been just like absolutely dumping on Hydra Bob, and now this deck enables them to take that, turn it around, and dump on people with Hydra Bob. And with
Exactly.
that, it's time to end. Thank you so much to YoWoody. Make sure you check him out. I will also be streaming on Twitch. I'm gonna try to go later than Woody, so hopefully I don't end up conflicting there in any way. But thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I have been Cam Best. He has been YoWoody, and I will see you in the next one.